Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for tuning in, listeners. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and we're on Big Little Small Talk. We've got a studio full of people here. We've got 4 people in the studio and they are all working on a really important project, and it's called the Headstone Healing Project. I'm sure most of the listeners would be aware of what happened in the Toowoomba Cemetery, I think in August this year. But I'll just introduce my guests. We've got Greg Johnson and Jim O'Day, who are founders of the Headstone Healing Project. And we've also got Lisa Herbert, who runs the Cemetery Tours of Toowoomba, and Mari Green, who is the president of the Toowoomba Family Historical Society. History Society. I knew that I was going to stuff up the name.
Toowoomba and Darling Downs Family History Society.
Okay, we've got the full name, and that's terrific because you're integrally involved in this project, being so familiar with the history, and both of you with the cemetery. So, Greg, what happened in August of this year?
On the 8th of August, a Friday evening and into Saturday morning, dare say, 3 little boys went into the cemetery and destroyed 143 headstones / graves and tootled off home. And a lot of parts were broken through that action. And so in my regular articles to the Chronicle every Thursday, I decided to write about it. And one Jim O'Day, unknown to me, but certainly known to me now, contacted me to say that we were thinking alike and could we get together, and here we are later.
But what was the intention, guys? Was the intention to do something about the people who'd done it, or was it to restore the graves, or was it to raise money, or all of the above, or?
Certainly not to do anything to the boys involved. The issue was restoring our heritage and history, and that can only come one way, and that's through money. The initial quote was $500,000 to repair all the headstones and graves, and Jim had, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a moment, Jim had in mind that that's something that we could achieve through the community.
Great. So Jim, what motivated you to become involved?
I guess, Megan, it was something I couldn't let go because from my perspective I think there's sort of 2 crimes here. The first one being when the actual headstones were damaged, the monuments were damaged. The second one is if we just do nothing and we just let all those smashed monuments and headstones that belong to the people who created the Toowoomba that we know, really, and set the platform for so many things that we enjoy now, to just be left there and left there to deteriorate. And so it was just something that I just couldn't do nothing about, and I reached out to Greg and said, let's do something, let's focus on trying to get these headstones repaired.
Look, we'll talk a little bit more about the project in a minute, but Mari, I want to bring you in here, and Lisa too, because there's been a sort of a recent development about what has happened or what the process is for the boys who, and I don't want you to identify them in any way, but can you talk to me, Mari, about what you did last week in the cemetery?
Not in the cemetery.
Oh, okay, beg your pardon, yeah.
Okay. First of all, I might just mention that the boys also threw a paperweight through our window at the library, through the toilet window at the library. Unfortunately, the door was open, so the glass literally went right across the room. We had our AGM that day, so that was lucky because we discovered the damage straight away, and our secretary had to clean it all up. She got online to try to report this damage, and we knew that there had been damage in the cemetery, but we assumed council would do that. She got online to try to report that, and she gave up, I think, when they just about wanted to know the colour of the building. So on the Sunday, went down after I'd finished working at the cafe, and I went to the police station and put a complaint in. On Monday morning, we had the police officers up to see us. At that stage, they did tell us that one of the boys had already told his mum and they'd come down to the police station. So he apparently had seen all the messages on Facebook, I gather, and hearing about the damage, he'd confessed to his mum. So that's how the 3 boys were caught, kind of thing. So
I suppose, Mari, what I want to talk about is a lot of these, there was a lot of community outrage about what had happened, and you know, everything from, you know, bigger jails to, you know,
yes.
this sort of thing. But I suppose what I'm really interested in what has been the outcome and what has been, and Lisa, you can comment on this too, what's been the process now that the boys have to go through?
That's right. Well, Lisa knows the exact title of the juvenile.
Yeah, so a decision was made not to put them before the courts. I believe that was a police decision, and instead trying to divert them away from crime by what's called a restorative justice panel. So how that works is they have to face the people who are affected by their actions. And a lot of people were screaming, no, they should go to court, you know, blah, blah, blah. But it's really interesting that this restorative justice panel last week alone was a session, and it went for 6 hours. So that's an intense face-to-face small group sitting in a circle talking to these youths and having their say. And then there's another one in coming days. So that's a lot for these kids to take on and absorb. And whereas had they gone to court, as a court reporter, they go to court, they're before a magistrate for 10 or 15 minutes. Lots of big words are spoken. They're spoken at. They don't know what's going on. And 9 times out of 10, youths leave that courtroom saying, what happened? So it could be said that this panel is more intense on them, and they're able to at least hear what their actions mean to other people. And I think that's probably a better outcome than going to court and just leaving confused and getting a community service or something. So it's a really interesting process. A range of stakeholders are involved. It could be the people who are directly affected and are grieving for the graves of their family loved ones that they feel have been desecrated. There are people who have been affected because their workload has increased. For example, council staff, you know, they've got to go through and document all this stuff and photograph all this stuff, deal with grieving families. Like, it's a huge impasse on a lot of people. And these youths get to face these people. And so Murray had a session. You were quite happy with yours?
We were.
Yeah.
When the session started, some of the people who were affected, you know, with their headstones, they were very angry. And by the end of the session, they were happy with the outcome. So, yeah.
And what was the reaction from the boys? Like, how do you think, did they feel like they were being kind of barraged with anger and hatred? Or
I don't think so.
What did you observe there?
I think Fiona handled it very well. I think we got a lot from it, as well as the boys got a lot from it. And we spoke to the boys and their carers, well, parents and whatever, afterwards. And yeah, so we were very happy with the outcome.
And tell me who are the stakeholders? Who decides who the stakeholders are?
So we've got to be really careful here. There are some privileged information and confidentiality reasons that we have to stick by. But generally, anyone who was affected could have made an application to the youth justice people here in Toowoomba to face these kids. Wide ranging from people emotionally affected by the desecration of the graves to people like me who don't have a personal connection with those graves but have a connection with the cemetery as a whole as a great public space for our community. So it really is broad ranging from people affected by increased workload, like stonemasons, for example. They're really busy this time of year because lots of people visit their loved ones at Christmas, and now they've got all these other graves and they're dealing with all these other inquiries from people. So there's wide ranging people affected. And yeah, anyone really could have had a say had they wanted to. And there are a lot of people who just didn't want to have the say. They didn't want to, or they felt threatened by being in that room. They thought they couldn't be diplomatic in front of these kids. You know, how do you face someone who has caused you so much grief? So it's really up to the individual to decide whether they want to take part or not.
But I guess the reason that they're using this process is it's been found to work and much more effective than punitive approach, isn't it?
It's been widely reported, not only this, it's a very common technique for sexual assault, for example. And I couldn't imagine being a sexual assault victim or a domestic violence victim and have to face the person who wronged you and did such horrible things. So, but that has been used time and time again and proven to be probably good for the person just to get their their anger across, or just to get their feelings across and to be heard, is half the battle for these people.
And you mentioned you were a reporter, is that correct?
I've been a journalist in my years. Yeah, don't do it anymore, but
Okay.
yes.
You thought taking people through the cemetery might be a bit more exciting, do you think?
Well, to be honest, they don't talk back.
Very good. Now let's go back to the project, Greg and Jim. So you got a committee together. How many are on your committee?
Well, we haven't actually established a committee, Megan. We're a group of like-minded people searching for the way forward, and what we've done essentially since late August is to bring people in under the umbrella. We're certainly looking at structure. We'll need to formalise this organisation. A lot of people want to give money, so we'll need to look at what options there are with the federal government in terms of donations. So there is no formal committee. I mean, clearly Jim is the founder, and I'm going along for the ride with him. But amazingly, all these other wonderful people who weren't necessarily personally affected, but were troubled by what they read in the newspaper and through your radio station and on Channel 7 and through my column. They wanted to do something, and they're not really sure what they want to do. They talk about labour, and that's going to be another discussion that we have to have. They talk about money. We've already received some donations, and we haven't actually sought them. But
So tell me about that. You have to be an incorporated body to be able to accept donations. Is that the case?
I think in its best sense, we'd be registered as a charity under the state government. That would be our status, I should think. And then after that, we've got to go through the process of formally getting accreditation to receive donations and get deductibility. And now Amari's already been through that, and that her situation would have been really good for us because we could have piggybacked her status and had that thing happening from the outset. And I'd like to talk to Mari later and see if she can get it back.
You can
We gave up our
hospice
tax
under that. Yes,
deductibility.
right. Okay. Well, it's all those the logistics of it, I suppose. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM, and we're on Big Little Small Talk. We're talking to people involved in the Headstone Healing Project, which is restoring some of the graves that were destroyed out at the Toowoomba Cemetery in August. Jim, you're looking, I think, mentioning around about 500,000. Is that the figure that you would like to get to?
That's a ballpark number that I think was talked about early on and more or less confirmed, still probably without a whole lot of information to confirm that with. But I guess we're not talking $5,000 or 50,000. It's probably around that sort of number.
So tell me about the individual sites. Like, have you got people who... what about the graves that there aren't any living relatives? How's it all going to work in terms of restoring?
That's one of the complexities of this project. It's not simply a matter of, okay, we can roll in there and start repairing things, because and I know Lisa and Ari are much more expert at this than I am, but certainly the monuments themselves that have been damaged are really the personal property of the families. The plot's owned by the families. Anything on the plot is really personal property, and so we need to, and we have been working with council, and they've been very good. The cemetery staff have been very good about trying to find a way where council are able to let us work on the ones, particularly the ones, there's only, out of the 143, there's maybe only, council is saying, about 25 that have a connection, any possible connection to the family. The others are just simply lost over time. I know Mari's got a much better records, and she'll say there's a bigger number there. Yeah. But ultimately, there's still a lot there because of the age of the grave sites. There's just no connection. So unless we do something, and we have to do it in the right way, then nothing will happen. Because of course, no family will come unless someone sort of stumbles on it and says, "Oh, that's my great grandfather, and I'd like to do something."
Because that was one of my questions about what is council's role. What will happen if they don't get restored? Will it just be cleared up, and sort of, you say that actually belongs to the family, but if there's no family, what happens then?
It's pretty typical to see damage in cemeteries, not only in Queensland but right around Australia. And there are many cemeteries, like even just down the hill at Ipswich, for example, who have had huge vandalism spades. And literally, the cemetery is flat because of all the monuments that have been knocked over and not fixed, because they haven't had those burial rights holders or the money. Like, it's very, very complex. So in this particular case, if there's no one there to fix them, they're often just laid down, made safe. And that, unfortunately, if they're laid down, sometimes that laid down face first. So you can't read the inscription or what's called a ledger on the monument, which would be awful. Like, I understand that monuments are heavy and they're dangerous if they're not restored correctly. So laying them down face up might be a very real possibility of the only way that we can salvage some of those really, really badly damaged headstones or memorial sites. And at least that way, that person's not forgotten. Like, there's a young boy who's, like, he was only 4 or 5 when he died, but his name is face first. And it's like, come on, he's been dead for 100 years. There's no family around him. He was the third son of a father who was an electrical contractor or electrician in town, much loved. He employed 30 people at the turn of the century. And this boy's important, but nobody knows who he is because his name's face down. So hopefully, I wouldn't imagine it would be council's responsibility to flip that over. But I would sincerely hope that it is the Headstone Healings Project and this community's responsibility, maybe not to fix that site, but at least just turn him over so we can see his name.
That's achingly sad, isn't it? Because I understand that the Toowoomba Cemetery is one of Queensland's oldest cemeteries. Is that true?
Absolutely, yeah. First burial was 1850. Thomas Ayres, we don't know where he is. There's a lot of unmarked graves within that cemetery. And that's the fun thing when I do my cemetery tours. I give the safety briefing at the start and I say, just be aware of the ground is uneven. And especially after this rain and after mowing, you can see the unmarked graves all lined up for 50 metres at a time.
Lisa, I did want to ask you about that because you had a picture of that on your Facebook site, Toowoomba Cemetery Tours. What happens? The ground subsides a little bit and you can see the edge of the
Any soil
plot.
disturbance? Yeah, soil disturbance, there is a subsidence, but also it changes the structure of the vegetation there. So maybe a different grass will grow, for example, which is what we see after rain and fresh mowing, which I took a photograph of. It's just as plain as day that the soil's been moved around, the seed structure has been moved around in that topsoil, so it grows a little bit differently. And also you've got a different nutrient load, dare I say it, within that plot as well, so that may affect it as well.
Interesting, very diplomatic way of talking about the cemetery. So we just go back to the project, the Headstone Healing Project. Guys, I see that you were talking to Kate Venables from TAFE tell me about what you were hoping to get some of the students there to do.
Yeah, that was a bonus. Working with council's been a real treat. And I contacted the mayor by SMS one evening. I'm sure he doesn't get too many SMSs, and suggested that we'd like to come along and address all of council at its ordinary meeting, which we did. And Kate was first up. She's a general manager, TAFE Toowoomba, and she was talking about TAFE and all the wonderful things that are happening there. And she sat around and listened to Jim and myself, and then came to see us later. And I didn't know, but there is actually a stonemasonry course at TAFE, and she'd like to get the students involved in that process. We've already got a stonemason on our group from W.H. Wagner, Michael Wagner, and he's been fantastic. He knows his stuff. He's a 5th generation stonemason, and there's a 6th generation stonemason following him too. So that would be a really good conversation for the education of those usually young people at TAFE, I guess, but older people. Maybe I could take that up. Yeah, to be involved, hands-on.
So, Greg, you're no stranger to organising things and putting your finger in a few pies. Tell the listeners what your history is. Why is this sort of something that's important to you, or why did you take this on? When you're not fundraising for political parties, you need to fundraise on a Headstone Healing Project. Is that right?
I'm just a target, I think, Megan. And
what do you mean you're a target?
A happy target. I've been involved in many projects around Toowoomba, and without exception, all unpaid. I've been on the hospice board for many years, and I'm on the RASQ, the Showgrounds board. I do all their grant applications for them, sometimes successful, other times not. And any number of other things. People come to me to ask me to help. And I guess the fact that you and I are on radio for so many years together on Friday mornings on another station, people would have listened to what you had to say and me, and they've contacted me. So that's why initially... I also got the Western Clydesdale's going to, and I didn't want that one, but we achieved what we had to do, and I retired. Now, the difference between retirement and resignation is when you resign, you're cranky. When you retire, you just realise you're getting really old. And having spoken to Jim in my fingertips through electronic media, I decided to meet up with him, and here we are today. But as I said earlier, it's been fascinating, the number of people that have come forward, and we meet every 2 weeks at Club Toowoomba in Hume Street, and new people come all the time. Today, Jim forwarded me contacts of 2 people that want to be involved. I think one has family buried there, and the other is retired and would like to put some labour in. And then one of the councillors sent me $100 today for the fund and fundraising, and I got another $1,000 from someone you know quite well. But it was a surprise, and a very pleasant surprise at that.
Well, that's great. So, Greg, you spent your majority of life as an accountant, correct?
Prefer to say a marketing accountant.
A marketing accountant before you were a
bookmaker.
A bookmaker, yeah. So you've had a variety of careers. You and I know each other because Greg was actually the CEO of the Optometrists Association, so that's how I first came into contact with Greg. But since then, we've been political friends and enemies, but most of the time I certainly admire the work that you're doing. So, all of these things, they always need someone to drive it. And do you ever say no to a request?
Sadly, no. I just said no then. But, I've had obviously a long career, born in Moree, God's country, and little bank Johnny. I went off to Sydney, studied accounting. I realised I didn't like it. I was adequate, but I preferred to talk and to market and make things happen. And, I did end up as CEO of the Optometrists Association for 12 years, and that was a joyous period of time, as you know. A lot of growth and a lot of success, and fighting the government about therapeutic substances for patients. And I had another 4 years after that, the French company that asked me to start a charity, and you were, I think, the first volunteer optometrist to come to a low socioeconomic school and oversee QUT students in optometry. And then we gave the children glasses. We did that right around Australia for 4 years.
Amazing. Jim, I'm shining the spotlight on you now. Tell us a little bit about your professional history.
Certainly. So you've got an accountant and an engineer by the sounds of it in this group. I'm an engineer. I did my study at USQ. This is my first encounter with Toowoomba was at university days. Went away for quite a few years doing other projects around Queensland, mainly mining construction work, and then came back to Toowoomba when I realised it was the best place to raise a family, and I absolutely still agree with that. And I worked for McNabb for a while, McNabb Construction, and Michael for 7 years, did my own thing, and then joined in with a partner from Gundawindi, Sean Rice, with Proterra Group.
Do you have a connection particularly with the cemetery? Do you have anyone buried there yourself?
I do have an uncle and a friend of mine who's buried there. So only quite recently. Other than that, I don't have a long-standing relationship with the cemetery, but it's amazing. It's one of those things when it's not until you go out there and have a walk around that you realise it's just an amazing place. It really is. And I really understand why Lisa runs Cemetery Tours there. And to see it in the morning with the fog just coming through and the light lifting, it's a stunning location, and it should be just as much part of our cultural history as the Empire Theatre or Queen's Park or Picnic Point, really. And it's fundamentally, that's where those people who gave us all those wonderful things are there. I mean, more than 30 mayors alone are in that Drayton and Toowoomba cemetery, so which should in and of itself make it a really historic place.
Let alone all the people who weren't mayors or weren't councillors or lots of other things as well. It's such an important project. If you've just tuned in, you're on Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to 4 people who are part of the Headstone Healing Project. We're talking to Greg Johnson and Jim O'Day, Mari Green and Lisa Herbert. Now, Lisa, I'm going to come over to you and talk to you about your interesting career. So you started off as a journalist, and now you're taking tours of the cemetery. Make that connection for me.
Well, I started off as an animal scientist, so I've got a background in agriculture. And while I was in Charleville doing sheep research, I kind of fell into the radio station there. and somehow I ended up in the media, and I've been in the media for many, many years since then. But I've always held an interest in Western society's aversion to death and dying, how we don't speak about it, and that kind of led me to the cemetery path, because cemeteries are filled with stories. I actually call the Drayton and Toowoomba Cemetery a library, because every grave holds a chapter of our history.
But don't you say that you can tell a lot about a town from its cemetery?
Absolutely.
What does that mean?
It means that you can just walk around and you can see, for example, the number of Catholics. Like, you can take a look at the religion just by simply looking at the size of the acreage giving to Catholics, and you can see lots of Celtic crosses, for example, which indicate Irish Catholics, and I know that there are so many Irish Catholics working on the railway. So that kind of thing, you start delving into those stories, and when you start delving into the railway, and then you delve into an engineer who fell overboard on a ship, but he was in Sydney Harbour, and he was responsible for a lot of these railway camps up and down the range. And when you think of, oh yeah, build a railway, we don't think about in the 1800s how hard it was for manual labour in the middle of nowhere. So these camps would be built. They'd be there for months at a time. There would be a baker, a butcher. There would be legal and illegal ale houses, for example. Whole families would live in these rail camps, but also children would die in these rail camps because, of course, poor sanitation. So it's easy for us to walk around and go, times are really hard. Mate, go back to the 1800s building a railway. And I only know that story because I started delving into people I found within that cemetery. And just the pioneers who came over from Europe and had no idea where they were heading to. They were given a land allocation, and then they got, like, there was a coal miner, for example, John Emerson, who came over in the late 1800s with his sons. He didn't know how to farm. He didn't know how to clear land. He was a coal miner, and yet he got acreage at Crow's Nest, which was forest. It was hoop pine forest, and he and his sons had to clear that with limited resources. So they used mallets, saws, cross saws, and they did that by hand. And eventually they were able to borrow the neighbour's horse where they could plough in some maize and some pumpkins and stuff. But of course, with every metre they tried to plough, all the wallabies came out and the paddy melons came out to eat what they were trying to do. And at the time, the government had bounties on wallabies, for example, and there was also pelts, so 2 shillings a pelt. So while they were working day and night to clear the land, at least they could get some money to fund their efforts. At least they had a permanent supply of firewood from all the trees. They had meat from the wildlife they were killing. But the fact that they worked for years trying to make a living, a coal miner who came over here, spent 3 months on a boat, and that story's just sitting there waiting to be told. And unless we tell those stories, we're going to lose them.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. So with the project, are there specific stories? Like, I think I saw Russell Dowrick. Is he personally affected by the desecration of one of the graves?
Yes, Russ is in our group.
Mm-hmm. Don't call it a committee.
Well, it's inevitable that it will be, I should think, subject to the founder's position on it. We need to formalise the arrangement at some stage. I mean, it's been lovely wandering around the way we have so far since August, and there's a lot of goodwill. But Russ came to us because he saw the media, and the media's been fantastic through the whole process. And essentially there's a site in the cemetery where his great-grandmother and great-grandfather lie, and his great-uncle, and 2 children of his great-grandfather and great-grandmother. I just can't work out exactly what you call them, cousins. Yeah, so he was really passionate about it, and I think initially he thought we may have already uncovered that $500,000 to do the job, but he's a man of limited means, and he has gone to the rest of his family to see if they will co-contribute to the restoration, and it does appear that they may not. So he's taken upon himself to pay for the correction, and he's done a lot of research. We did some interviews last week with Chris Mybush, a good friend of yours, who's been fantastic helping us through this. So he's got a drone, so it goes out and takes lots of photos, and so Russ has been really important in the process so far.
And Russ's family, that was a big monument. We're talking about a big column, so very costly, very heavy. Yeah.
He's looking at some maybe $5,000, maybe $6,000 to restore it, and he will do that. I don't doubt it.
Yeah,
it's that
yeah,
important
yeah.
to him. Sorts of things Lisa's been talking about, the
Yeah.
passion.
So, Lisa, just going back to you, I'm sorry we're jumping all around the place, but you said about the different denominations in the cemetery. So, I read that there's Catholics, Anglicans, Wesleyans, which I'm not sure what that is, Congregationalists, Jews and pagans, section for paupers, stillborn babies and Muslims.
Yeah, and that's changed over the years. So, for example, the war part of the cemetery is where that was originally allocated to the pagans cemetery. So it has evolved as the community evolves. And the Muslims, for example, which is towards the back of the cemetery, their graves are facing west-north, whereas most of the historical graves, they're all facing east-west. But Toowoomba is the furthest Muslim burial ground in Queensland, the furthest west. So many Muslims would come in from remoter areas and bury in Toowoomba. So it's really substantial.
Because, would you explain that a little bit to me more? Is that because there wasn't somewhere further west that you could get buried, or
Pretty much
you have
so.
to be buried in a certain way? If
You
you're
have
a
to be
Muslim?
buried in a certain way, and not everyone. See, we outsource our dead these days, and the community has lost its way of dealing with our own dead in our own in our own families and our own homes. The Muslims are very hands-on. They're very community-minded, and majority of them care for their own dead. However, in St George, for example, I understand there are some Muslims that were buried outside of the cemetery. So not only are we racist in life, we're also racist in death. We segregate these people, and they actually moved the fence of the St George Cemetery in relatively recent decades to include them. So it wasn't uncommon that these people were just not welcomed in certain cemeteries, depending on their religion. We've got people who were hanged, for example, 4 men were hanged here in Toowoomba. They're in unmarked graves. And like so often of the time, they were not given headstones because they were considered to be not worthy of headstones. So they're there somewhere, we just don't know. So there's this real attitude after death about who deserves notoriety or who deserves a certain resting place.
Just talking about the St George Cemetery, an interesting story there was a lot of the Chinese gold miners, and they were buried in the St George Cemetery, and they only had wooden crosses, and then a big fire went through there and they were all lost.
Very typical. At Leeburn, for example, there aren't any Chinese graves in the Leeburn Cemetery, but it's believed they were buried probably about 700 metres down, it's just a paddock now, and same sort of thing. They would have had simple graves with no one to maintain their graves, so no one knows where they are. They just think that somebody saw something on a map that was a burial ground, and now they think that's a Chinese burial ground. It just happens to be a paddock with cattle and buffalo on it at the moment.
Yeah, interesting. Mari, I want to bring you in here with your Family History Society, because I would imagine you and Lisa work quite closely, do you? Lisa, you're accessing Mari's records and things to try and find out information.
They are phenomenal.
So
Can
tell
I
me-
just say, as far as travelling the country, researching cemeteries, the Toowoomba group does the most phenomenal work I've ever seen of a cemetery.
Lisa bought all our publications, whole 7 volumes, and volume 8 will be out after Christmas, Lisa.
So just tell me about the organisation. What do you do? Where are you? And who do you help? And who can access it?
The Drayton and Toowoomba Cemetery is our backyard. We moved the old Drayton North Post Office up to the cemetery in 2006. I've been president since 1999. I was a lot younger when I started this. I joined the Family History Society in 1881. And in
1881.
1881. Oh,
Yes.
You're
it would
looking
be
great,
right.
Mari.
It would
You
be
are
right.
looking great.
It would be right.
So who's
Goes to show how much research
That's
we're
right.
doing all the time.
Who comes and do you meet? Do you have meetings? Do you have
We do.
information sessions or the records?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of records, and times have changed. We have a lot of digitisation records, digitisation projects now. We have 4 Australian computers. We have 1 overseas computer for people to use. We have film readers, books, films,
Newspaper clippings.
newspaper clippings. We have one of our members has actually indexed the Toowoomba Chronicle from 1921 to 1997. Unfortunately, he can't do it anymore, so We've still got his laptop out the back, and the last film he was working on is still sitting there waiting for me to get the time to go and finish indexing that particular year. But that's, great. We've got school records. We've got about a couple of thousand school admission registers. We have members who are indexing them. We have master indexes, so people come in to do their family history. The first thing they do is they check our master indexes to see if we have something on their family. People come, like today, a couple came in, she's from St George. They just pay $10 a day and do casual research. Membership, on the other hand, is $10 joining fee and $36 a year membership, and $2.50 a time when you come in. It is not dear, but it's cash. Never mind cards. Cash is king.
So tell me about the lecture series that you have and the meetings, or why.
Well, we have discussion groups. So we have the discussion group girls, who are Thursday girls, and the second Saturday of the month and the last Saturday of the month, they have a discussion group, and they have a different subject each time for people, for our members to come along to. So that's always very well attended. Mm-hmm. We have 2 people on library duty every day, as well as other people who are doing projects. We are very fortunate that we have a lot of volunteers. I have a lot who are working remotely, one in Canberra, and one of our ladies who's over 80, she sent me the school she'd finished indexing on Friday, and I suddenly realised last night I hadn't sent her a new school. Today I got an email, Mari, can I please have a school? So I sent her one, and I got an email back saying, please don't forget it's the holidays coming up and I'll need some work over the holidays.
That's what you need.
So
those sort of volunteers.
How good are people?
They are so dedicated. But, when we first started, we walked the cemetery and we wrote down the inscriptions, and then we published the books with all the inscriptions in. Now, of course, you whiz around with a camera. But in those days, it was all hard jacker, and then we had to type them in.
So was that, Mari, not documented by council, or it's only...
Well, not in those days. We're going back to 1981, yes.
Tell me, like you said that someone came in today, what's a sort of typical person who, they want to know something about their relatives, do they? Yeah.
That's right. And often people come in just to check up to see where the family's buried. And, of course, once we get them in the door, if we know the name, we immediately go to one of our indexes to say, is that your family? So that's how we get them hooked.
And I know on your Facebook page you often have wedding Wednesdays, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah, Tombstone Tuesdays, wedding Wednesdays.
And is it because someone's giving you a photo and you're trying to identify it, or how does that all work?
When the Toowoomba Chronicle moved building from Ruthven Street, they didn't want to take all their photos with them. So they contacted us, and they had to give us the filing cabinets as well because we didn't have enough room for them. So they gave us all the photos. So I have indexed them all, and Bev Lacey would then phone me and say, Mari, have you got the photo for somebody is looking for this photo? Now our Vice President and our treasurer's digitising them all, but our Vice President just goes through and picks out the photos that we've got. So we've got a lot of wedding photos, and
you must hear some amazing stories. So you put those up, and then people contact you and say, "That's
right.
That's my aunt, and she was married at something." Yeah, amazing. So then your connection, obviously, you're sort of almost the holder of all the knowledge in a way of all of this whole project, aren't you?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So all of these graves where you don't have any relatives, but you've got information. Is that right, guys?
Oh, that's unclear at this stage. I think it's fair to say, but I know in the early discussions with Jim, he was passionate about the fact that where there are no families, living for those older graves, about the time where Murray was born in 1881, for example.
Never lived that down.
We had a responsibility to rectify the damage in the absence of any family members who could make a contribution.
Incredible. Okay, well, now I'm running out of time, but since you're all here, and I'll just remind the listeners who is here, we've got some key people from the Headstone Healing Project, and they are Lisa Herbert, and she runs a company called Cemetery Tours Toowoomba, which I think I definitely need to get there. You do midnight tours as well, is that right?
No, nothing at night.
Okay.
I guess it's difficult because people say, oh, is it a ghost tour? But being an ex-journo too, I'm fact-driven. So I'm like Mari, we want to know the real stuff, so no. And to be honest, it was hard enough to get public liability insurance for daytime walks. I daren't approach my insurance company for nighttime. So no,
How often are you running tours?
As required. So this weekend, for example, I've got an easy access tour, it's really important that these kind of public spaces are accessible for as many people as possible. So I've devised a tour for people with mobility issues, that can't walk around a long cemetery for a couple of hours. This tour is safe. It's designed for wheelchairs and wheelie walkers and slow walkers. And it's important that these people can enjoy what we enjoy and learn our history. So as needed, I'm happy to do private tours for people and stuff. Getting the word out's pretty hard, and it's slow and steady, but the people who do come, it's like Mari hooks them in once they go into her building. They hook them in and get them involved in their family's history. I'm the same. Once people come to the cemetery and they learn, and we don't only talk about graves, we talk about the burial practice of the day and funeral practices, because it's so unique. Like in Toowoomba, like so many cemeteries, typically in those days they were died one day, buried the next. There was none of this 3 days later or a week later, that kind of thing. And often funeral processions either left the hospital or the home or the train station, depending if the body had been trained in. So there's all these stories and people are fascinated. And I had people a couple of weeks ago who said, I've lived here for 35 years and I've never walked into this cemetery. And I've seen them twice since at that cemetery, because they're hooked too.
Well, I think part of your thing must be you have to be a good storyteller, don't you, to keep them engaged?
The stories tell themselves, and this is what I'm trying to... You don't need to make... you don't need ghost stories when the realities of life and death in our pioneering times are so enthralling.
Can I ask, is there an Indigenous section at the cemetery?
Not that I've been able to find, but there is a...
is that fairly typical of cemeteries?
Yes. Well, it's hard to say. It depends on the area. Mari can probably talk more about this, about the Toowoomba one, but you can go to a Western cemetery and you can tell they're Indigenous graves because they often don't have a grave on them. A lot of people don't want to be buried under a slab of cement, but a lot of Indigenous graves have those plastic flowers all over them. Like, we're talking 2 meters of just beautiful floral arrangements, plastic arrangements, and that's why I can drive past the cemetery and I go, look at all those Indigenous people. And we spoke just earlier about you can tell a lot about a town by its cemetery. I can go, look at all those Indigenous graves. This is obviously a large Indigenous community, simply by looking for those plastic flowers.
That is incredible. I would never have thought that. Now, I'm going to go round. I'm going to ask you all who your favourite royal is. That's part of being on Big Little Small Talk. Doesn't have to be living, and they don't have to necessarily be English. And I want to know the song that won't keep you off the dance floor. And I'm going to go with you, Jim, to start.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Are you a royal person? Do you follow the royals?
I'm a definite Republican.
Boo.
If you had to have a royal, quieten down, crowd.
Then it would be Queen Mary of Denmark, being an Australian who... The best way, I think, to become a royal was to fight your way up there, I suppose, and adapt to a new culture, and I think she's amazing. We're also born in the same month in the same year.
Ah, and he doesn't follow her at all. There's nothing about her. Nothing.
Not until you've
forced into it.
That's right.
Okay, what about your song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
There's pretty much every song will keep me off the dance floor.
Oh, no, can't keep you off the dance floor.
Nut Push City Limit is amazing, and everybody should dance to that.
You know the moves. You're not going in the wrong direction when you're going right. You're going left.
I always told myself half a second after everybody else, so I know exactly.
Follow along behind. Exactly. Greg, can I guess your royal?
Yeah, sure. Can I just say on the Indigenous graves, because I'm from northern New South Wales, places like Mungandai, which actually straddles both Queensland and New South Wales, and Colleranabri, which is in that proximity, they have specialised areas for Indigenous people. And I didn't see any plastic flowers, but they have lots of coloured glass. So might just a perfume bottle, and it's completely covered that way, but there's no concrete slab. King Charles III, what a legend. I mean, to wait till he was almost as old as Murray, born in 1881, to take over from his mum was pretty remarkable. I'm a monarchist. I think the system's great. And when you look at republics like North Korea or Cuba or Russia, and then you look at Australia, I think we're doing pretty well. My favourite song is from 1965. It's called...
Is it not the Bee Gees? No?
No, it's not the Bee Gees. It's Manfred Mann.
Oh,
no,
nice.
It's actually the Animals, Eric Bird and the Animals. He had a song called "We Got to Get Out of This Place," and my best friend Donnie King, who sadly died at age 59, and I would go to the Moree Memorial Hall every Friday and Saturday and dance, and that was our favourite. But Donnie sang it because he wanted to get out of that place. I was quite happy in Moree, and so that's one that sticks with me from my teenage years in the 60s.
Excellent. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. Much better than who you love.
Beach
Roy,
Boys.
Yeah, your Beach Boys. That's right. Okay, Murray, over to you. Who's your favourite royal?
Princess Anne.
Oh, I've only had Anne once before.
She's a very hard-working royal. I think and she doesn't mind being the spare. She's great.
Very horsey.
Well, she happens to love horses.
She does. And I was only going down a rabbit hole about her the other day, and she and her current husband he doesn't have any love for horses, but he's happy to support her in the horsey world. What about the song that won't keep you off the dance floor?
Look, I don't care. I was going to ask my daughter for the name of any song, and then I forgot. I was so busy.
You mean you're a perennial dancer, or you don't dance?
I don't dance.
Oh.
Good girl.
How could you not dance?
Well,
Just
I do.
stand there and move around.
But I
it.
dance to whatever comes on.
I'm with you. Okay, I like that too. Okay, Lisa?
Diana Ross, Chain Reaction, taking back to my Gatton College days in the 80s. There'd be a dance, I think it was on Wednesdays. So it was a big party at Gatton College, so everyone would go out and have a big night on the Wednesday and expect to front up at lectures on the Thursday.
You did it? And what about a royal?
Diana, Princess Diana. Again, she was only a few years older than me. Her 30 years older than me. But just to her grace that she came from nowhere, the battles that she faced, and just an enigma. It was just fun watching her ride, and very sad. And I remember the moment she died, as probably we all did. Yeah, Diana, easy, and that was an easy one. And I really respect what Princess Anne does. She's remarkable, just being in the background, but chugging away and doing her thing.
Yep.
Beautiful. Well, look, I thank you all very much for coming in and sharing. Could you just tell the listeners, Greg, perhaps how they could get involved and find out more about the Headstone Healing Project? Certainly.
We've got a Facebook page and there's a contact on that, but I'm happy for them to call me if they wish. 0414 783 343. 0414 783 343. Happy to take the call, and we get lots of calls. And we're meeting again tomorrow night. We've got a few new starters coming along.
Okay, well, that's been an honour and a pleasure to have you in all today. And I'll just remind you, it's Greg Johnson and Jim O'Day. Jim's the founder of the Headstone Healing Project. We've got Mari Green, who's from the Family History Society, and Lisa Herbert, who runs Cemetery Tours Toowoomba. Thank you all very much for making time for us
Thanks,
today.
Megan.
We appreciate your interest. It's great. Thank you.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.